Have you ever heard of the catacombs in Rome? Long ago, Christians would gather there in these places where the dead were buried in order to avoid Roman persecution because the Romans wouldn't go there at the time. What was it about the Christians' attitudes about death that allowed them to enter into that place that the Romans wouldn't go out of fear? I think that's something that would be important for us to think about today as we consider what are our attitudes about death and how we look at the end of our lives, especially as Christians. Back before Rome was built on the Italian peninsula, there were other people that lived in that area. There was a group that was called the Etruscans, and the Etruscan civilization had a tradition that when their people died, they would bury them in underground chambers. And these chambers became what we later knew as the catacombs. Now, that word catacomb in and of itself, it just means among the dead. And so when the Romans took over, those catacombs were already there. But the Romans had some different religious feelings about death than the Etruscans did. They tended to cremate their dead. And they were deeply superstitious about death. And they didn't want to do anything connected to places where there were bodies or bones and the like. And so they wouldn't enter into these structures that we call the catacombs. Now, Christians, they buried their dead. And that kind of flows out of the Judaic traditions that you would bury your bodies. But during times of persecution, they often took advantage of these places where the Romans wouldn't go. And they would gather there for worship services and for funerals and for the like. And a big part of this was the simple truth that Christians don't fear death, or at least we shouldn't fear death. And it's not that death is no big deal. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 26, St. Paul calls death the last enemy that is to be defeated. It's the last one that needs to be destroyed. It's actually already been defeated in Christ's death and resurrection. It's still at work, though. It hasn't been properly, fully destroyed. So, be very clear, death is an enemy that needs to be set aside as of yet. We're still going to face it. But Jesus' resurrection means that as bad as death is, it's a defeated enemy. It's an enemy that does not get the last say. Instead, the end is really about Christ's life and his resurrection. And this life that he gives to his followers is full, it's abundant, and it is eternal. So Christians, we don't fear death. And that's part of why we celebrate All Saints' Day in November. And I want to take advantage of this time connected to All Saints' Day to think about our attitudes about death and how we handle our commemoration of people who die. We usually call this funerals. So when we come to the end of a person's life, we tend to approach that moment differently from the rest of the world. And over the next few weeks, I want to spend some time looking at different aspects of a Christian funeral. Now, there's no doubt death is terrible. It's a horrible experience. There's heartache. There's loss. We were not created to die. And in death, there is this relationship that we've lived in. We were created for relationships, to love one another and to love God. And death breaks those relationships. It separates the love that we were intended to live in. And we were created to live. And so death is a kind of violation in God's design for us. Death is a consequence of sin. In Romans chapter 6, verse 23, it says that the wages of sin is death. And sin is something that is in our life. It's something that we inherit. We're just born into it. And sometimes people will look at that and say, well, that's not fair. Why am I going to die because of what somebody else did before me? But there's more to it than that. It's not just that we've inherited it, we have committed it. We have participated in it. And that means that, according to God's law, all of us deserve to die. And God warned Adam and Eve, the first people, that this would be the case. In Genesis chapter 2, he says that the day that you eat from the fruit of the tree that I told you not to eat from, you will die. And when they ate from that tree, it created a spiritual separation between God and humanity, and they were spiritually dead and only alive by faith after that. So when we look at how we handle death as Christians, a funeral, in a sense, is an act of defiance. It's an act of defiance against the order of this world. It's an act of defiance against death. We take hold of Jesus' promise that he makes in Romans chapter 11, that even if we die, yet shall we live. And in Romans, it calls God the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the, not the dead, but of the living. And that these people are continuing to be alive even though they've died here on earth. And what this message does when we come to the end of a life, when we come to a funeral, is that it inserts hope into a moment that, in the world's point of view, is a moment of futility. As far as the world is concerned, death is the end. And for a lot of people, they think that there's nothing after that. It's just loss and emptiness, and you're gone. But for the Christian, we look at that as a moment of hope, that that person is still alive, and they're alive in Christ with God, and they look forward to the day of resurrection. And so that's why Christian poets like John Donne, they kind of sympathize with death. They say, "Oh, poor death." Like we feel bad for death because of the futility of its boasting that it is this great and overarching thing. But Jesus speaks into that moment in our lives, and he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And in the end, because of Jesus, life wins and death is destroyed. In our culture, places of death are usually considered to be scary. There are all kinds of books that are written and movies that have been made where the graveyard is this creepy place, and there are monsters and ghouls and vampires and ghosts that dwell there. But historically, when you look at Christian cemeteries, those are placed right next to our churches. There are lots of churches that have graveyards that are part of their property. And I think that is an act of defiance. It's saying these are our members, and death has not taken them away from us. They continue to be here with us, and we wait for the day of the resurrection when they will be alive and they will be with us once again. And we can look forward to that blessed reunion. We have a columbarium here at Gloria Dei. It's a place where you put the ashes from somebody who's been cremated. And every once in a while, I'll go out there and I'll look at the names out there and I'll say to myself, these are people who are still with us. We're just waiting for the resurrection. They are part of what we would call the church triumphant. So I want to leave you today with a poem. It's John Donne's Death Be Not Proud. And it goes, "Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which are but thy pictures be, much pleasure then from thee must more flow. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones in the soul's delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well. And better than thy stroke, why swellest thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. So, Christian, defy death. Celebrate the life that we have in Christ, and know that in Him, death is a defeated enemy who will be destroyed in the end. Hey, if this has been helpful for you, please like it, share it, help other people to find it. And God bless you. I'll come back next week and we'll talk a little bit more about funerals.